In the last weeks, we have seen marches and protests for the rights of women to feel safe in their workplaces. As Aboriginal women who have attempted to highlight these very same issues within our own communities and within our own homes, our cries have largely fallen on deaf ears. There have been no marches for us. There was no march for the 2-year-old girl who was raped in Tennant Creek. There have been no... Sorry, can I start that again?
Yeah, let's go from
It must be the whole camera in my face thing. All right, sorry. Okay, I'll start again.
Pretend it's not here.
All right.
It's just me.
Okay. In the last weeks, we have seen marches and protests for the rights of women to feel safe in their workplaces. As Aboriginal women who have attempted to highlight these very same issues within our own communities and within our own homes, our cries have largely fallen on deaf ears. There have been no marches for us. There was no march for the 2-year-old who was raped in Tennant Creek. Why is it we have two standards in this nation? And why is it that we allow ourselves to be more concerned with being labelled racist than standing up for the human rights of marginalised Australian citizens? When you come from the bush, like Cheron and many of my family do, you can be out of sight and out of mind. You have no voice. When you come from the bush, all the decisions are made for you by people living in cities. Any decisions that are made out bush are often made by powerful bullies. Sometimes these bullies are men who are perpetrators themselves. When these men and their female kin are given power, women and children victims are silenced. When we hear activists in our cities demanding justice for black deaths in custody, we think, what about the black deaths from homicide and suicide as a result of violence and sexual abuse in our communities? Why don't all these city activists care about the lives of children in communities? What about all the women in our families suffering at the hands of perpetrators every single day? It feels as though these activists don't seem to care for these women. A lot of the time, the family of these women in remote communities don't even care for them, but they care more for the perpetrators. And if these perpetrators die in jail, there is an outcry from the activists and their friends in mainstream media and nothing for their victims. Nothing but deafening silence. Aboriginal children are Australian citizens. They deserve to be protected just like other Australian children. Aboriginal women are Australian citizens, and we deserve to be heard just like other Australian women. When children in our communities are raped, there are no big marches around Australia. Instead, anyone who tries to bring these issues into the spotlight is called racist. It is really racist to ignore our issues. It is racist to hold to a lower standard for Aboriginal women and children. This is the worst kind of racism, the one that pretends to be anti-racist. All we want is to be heard. All we want is for our children to grow up free from violence and sexual abuse. We want our communities to be safe. We want to be able to talk about these issues with everyone else, with our fellow citizens, because we can't do this by ourselves. We don't want to change the date of Australia Day. That is not an issue for us. We want an effective way to deal with our suffering, the suffering of our children. We're not interested in the trauma of those who lived 200 years ago. We want to deal with the trauma that is happening every single day. We don't want a country that is divided by race, because we would not be here today without the people we love in our lives who are black, white, and everything else. In the cities, we are all ethnically mixed, racially mixed. That is a fact. Yet, if we mention this, we're condemned. Yes, it is time for some truth telling. and it is time that voices from the bush are listened to, and that anyone who wants to support us by speaking up about our issues is able to, without being accused of racism. With that, I would like to invite Cheron Long to speak her truth.
My name is Cheron Long. I have come here today to tell you stories about a very important issue. I grew up in a small community called Bulla, Northern Territory. It is a place that I have very dark feelings for. I am the oldest child out of 6 children, my brother who's 5 and 4 sisters, 7, 10, 11. And my sister Misha, who is here today with me, who is turned 18 in a couple of months' time. Because of the neglect from my parents and the rest of my family. I have been the main carer for my brothers and sisters for a very long time now. I've got 2 children of my own as well. It's been very hard raising them as well as my brother and sisters. But they have no one else to watch over them and keep them safe. There is alcohol-fueled violence in our community every day. Too much drunk, fighting. It is not a safe environment, healthy, safe environment for our kids. On any given day, you can see and hear women getting assaulted by their partners. You can see kids walking around house to house looking for food. The kids see the drunken parties, they see and hear the drunks walking around Bulla yelling and abuse at people. We have to live with an Aboriginal rape culture. Sexual abuse is accepted as normal to many Aboriginal communities. When I have been interviewed by the media, I have been told not to use these words because they demonize Aboriginal men. The media don't want to hear the truth, but white feminists are allowed to say whatever they want. Why is it that Aboriginal women and children suffer the most, but they don't let us have our own voice when it comes to sexual and violence abuse in this country? Why won't they let us tell our own story? We can't fix our problems because we cannot tell the truth about what is happening. There is no support for the victims in these communities, only for the perpetrators. I can't stop thinking about my cousin Layla Leering. She was found dead under a tree in Bulla. The police said she killed herself, that it was a suicide. Then why did she suffer vaginal and anal injuries just before she died? My cousin was like so many teens in her community. She lived life with no support. She lived with constant boredom. She was always looking for something to take her mind off her problems. My cousin, like to many other young girls, look for alcohol and ganja to escape from the pain and boredom. This is their reality. Layla was so bored that she would hang around with a lot of older family members. Most of the time, she'd get drunk with them. She got no support from family and she kept failing at school. So her life just got worse and worse. Instead of helping her, adult relatives would give her alcohol and encourage her to drink. Although that was against the law, she never stood a chance. A lot of welfare reports were filed, but there was no follow-up. Her carer was transferred from family in Bulla to family in Katherine. That failed very quickly, and she soon ended up back in the alcohol-fueled life of Bulla. That led to her horrible death. The coroner said she died in suspicious circumstance. In the hours before her death, witness said that she was drunk, arguing and fighting with a 30-year-old male family member over alcohol in the main street of Bulla. The coroner's report also said that an underage male she knew admitted to having sex with her when she was drunk, just before she was found dead because they couldn't find enough evidence and because people in the community would not talk to them. The police decided there was no foul play. They decided that my 15-year-old cousin had killed herself. There are so many young girls out in the bush who have no voice and are too afraid to talk up, to tell the world what is happening to them. They are forced to be silent. Under customary law, it is widely accepted for older men to take an underage bride by force. Sometimes this is supported by the criminal justice system. Many older men have been given a slap on the wrist sentence for raping their underage promised wives. When customary law is accepted, it is always the victims who suffer, not the perpetrators. Everyone knows that Aboriginal women suffer the most from domestic violence right across the nation. Yet customary law does not let young women and girls have a voice. No one thinks about you. No one thinks about young girls like my cousin Layla, who have their lives brutally cut short by the toxic, vicious community culture. That culture is never talked about. These young ones are the hidden victims with no voice, and it is wrong. They need a voice. They are citizens too. They have the same human rights as any other girls in this country. Australia need to see what my mob go through every day. It hurts me when I see these change the date protesters about Australia Day. They don't have anything to say about the abuse that Aboriginal women and children go through every day at the hands of other Aboriginal people. The protesters push us down. They don't care about us. They don't want to hear the truth. For me, Australia Day is full of happiness and sadness, all mixed up. We should all think about our past and celebrate how far we have come as one people. It is a day for celebration and reflection, and by God, it should stay that way. There is a youth crime epidemic at the moment in the Northern Territory. It is much worse there than in the rest of the country. I'm sure many of you would have seen the recent story on a current affair about the youth youth crimes crisis, Alice Spring. These are very real problems that needs very real answers. Good people are prisoners in their own town. They are afraid to go out at night and afraid to go to sleep. Car thief, break and enters, assault, domestic violence, willful damage, disorderly conduct, and antisocial behavior are a daily issue for police and community members. And these problems are only getting worse. The kids who prowl around the town in a large group are looking for refuge from bad home life. They are often turning to the street to get away from their home and families. Their home life is filled with alcohol and violence. When I was a young kid, growing up, alcohol was around me. Everywhere I turned, both my mother and father were heavy drinkers. There was very little escape from it. Many other kids in the community, in my community, were in the same situation with no good home life and no support. The chance to run away to town for a couple of days and prowl the street was always a better option than sitting around watching all the adults getting drunk and fight. They would spend all the welfare money that was meant for the kids on grog. It was damper for breakfast, lunch, dinner, as the money was all wasted. We had to rely on elderly family members, poor, sick, old people for food because of the lack of parental responsibility. Running away to town was an escape for many youngsters. Having no positive role models makes for a very hard upbringing. Often kids are left to grow themselves up. The basic principles of life are not taught to them, to many of the young ones. Bullies and perpetrators are the heroes. Many bow down to them in fear. I hear Aboriginal leaders in a parliament attack other members of parliament because they are white when they try to speak up for us. This is not true reconciliation. When I hear Aboriginal leaders say that they feel unsafe in their own workplace here in Canberra because they are Aboriginal, I think, well, why don't you come and live in remote community for just 1 week and then tell me if you feel safe. When I hear academics and Aboriginal leaders slam the cashless debit card, I think, why don't you ask us women who have to feed children and try to keep our money safe from relative who wants to take it from us for alcohol and ganja? Why don't these people fight for our rights instead of the rights of those who do the wrong thing? The respect for culture and elders is at an all-time low, as well as the willingness to teach or practice culture in many areas because of alcohol abuse. I would love to see these change the date protesters come to place, like Alice Spring, Bulla, to march and protest for the kids. They are the ones who needs everyone's support. They are the most vulnerable. They are not being supported enough by their own families, their communities, or the Aboriginal organisation. They are the ones whose voice are silenced. The protesters, the Aboriginal leaders, the politicians need to learn to listen to them. I invite anyone I invite anybody to come and tour in the remote community at Bush and see what is happening on the ground instead of sharing your opinions and making statements from the city and trying to silence those who are trying to tell the truth. Please come out and visit with your eyes and ears open. I challenge you.
Thank you.